For most people, moving into a quiet suburban neighborhood meant peace, privacy, and the joy of finally escaping the chaos of the city. For Daniel Reeds, a 38-year-old retired electrician with a love for DIY projects and solitude, this was supposed to be his little corner of paradise. After 15 years of crawling through crawl spaces and sorting tangled wires, he'd earned the right to enjoy his afternoons sipping coffee on his porch, watching squirrels dart across the lawn, and tinkering with his garden lights. His house, a cozy single-story home with navy blue shutters and a wraparound porch, sat at the end of a cul-de-sac where most neighbors waved hello but otherwise kept to themselves. It was exactly what Daniel wanted. No drama, no noise. Just the hum of cicadas in summer and the distant chirp of crickets at night. That peace, however, came with one glaring exception. Karen Mitchell, his next-door neighbor, was a walking Shoei manual wrapped in yoga pants and attitude. She'd lived on the street long before Daniel bought his house 2 years ago, and she made it clear from day one that she ran this neighborhood. Always watching from her window like a hawk with binoculars, she'd leave notes if your trash can was out an hour too long, or if your grass was an inch higher than regulation height. The other neighbors mostly ignored her, smiling politely and nodding when necessary. Daniel, on the other hand, preferred to keep interactions to the bare minimum. At first, he chalked it up to her being overly involved. Some people just needed a project. But over time, her behavior tipped from mildly annoying to downright invasive. She'd walk her tiny yapping dog right through his flower beds, let herself peek over his backyard fence to check on things, and once even knocked on his door to inform him his mailbox was slightly off-center. Daniel, patient by nature, let most of it slide. He'd dealt with worse personalities on job sites and knew better than to escalate. Still, something about Karen rubbed him the wrong way. Not just her entitlement, but the way she always seemed just on the edge of doing something worse. One quiet afternoon in early spring, Daniel was out in his garage organizing his tools when he heard the familiar buzz of Karen's prized possession, her all-terrain vehicle. Loud, obnoxious, and completely unnecessary for suburban streets, the ATV was her favorite way to patrol the neighborhood. She'd drive it slowly up and down the block, waving at people like a parade queen, always keeping an eye out for violations or suspicious activity. No one else owned an ATV on their street because, frankly, no one needed one. But Karen? She treated hers like a police cruiser. That particular afternoon, Daniel watched as she zipped up the road, pulled into her driveway and parked in her garage. Nothing unusual, just another day. But when he went inside and checked his mail, he noticed something odd. His monthly electricity bill. It had spiked. Now, Daniel was no stranger to fluctuations. He ran his AC responsibly, had swapped to energy-saving bulbs, and even installed motion sensors in his garage. But this increase made no sense. He stared at the bill for a long moment, lips pursed, and then shrugged it off. Maybe the new fridge was pulling more power than he thought, but that wasn't it. Deep down, something itched at the back of his mind. A feeling he couldn't shake, and it started the same way most disasters do. Small, unnoticeable, like the quiet before a summer thunderstorm. Daniel sipped his coffee a little slower that day. His eyes wandered to the side of his house, to the fence, to the cable box, and for the first time in months, he wondered if maybe Karen wasn't just an overbearing neighbor. Maybe she was something else entirely, something worse, and though he didn't know it yet, the storm was already brewing, right under his nose. Hey, real quick, if you're enjoying the video so far, make sure to hit that like button, share it with friends, and subscribe for more awesome content. And while you're at it, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. All right, let's keep going. The following month, the electricity bill arrived like clockwork. But this time Daniel didn't just glance at it. He stared. The numbers practically glared back at him. A 34% increase. That made 2 months in a row. And while he wasn't obsessive about every cent, Daniel had always been meticulous about his usage. Years in the field had taught him to spot energy drainers from a mile away. He double-checked his thermostat settings, unplugged tools in the garage, and even ran a diagnostic on his HVAC system. Everything was running efficiently. Still, the meter kept climbing. That same week, Daniel noticed something else, something subtle but odd enough to raise an eyebrow. Karen's ATV, which normally grumbled to life a few times a week for her self-assigned patrols, was now a daily occurrence. Not just daily, it was running longer. The low-pitched buzz of the engine started echoing through the neighborhood in the mornings, afternoons, and sometimes well into the evening. It was like she was preparing for the suburban Baja 500. At first, Daniel dismissed it as a coincidence. Maybe she was bored. Maybe she joined an online ATV club full of middle-aged vigilantes. But curiosity started to gnaw at him, especially when he noticed that Karen's garage door stayed closed more than usual. She used to keep it wide open, ATV proudly displayed like a trophy on a pedestal. Now it was shut tight. No revving from the driveway. No Karen polishing it in her driveway like she used to. Just that sound, coming from somewhere. Then came the light. Late one evening, Daniel stepped out to take the trash to the curb. The sky had already dipped into a soft navy hue, and the street was silent, save for the occasional cricket and hum of distant traffic. As he walked past the side of his house, something caught his eye. A faint, pulsing glow coming from behind his fence, just along the property line he shared with Karen. Squinting, he took a few careful steps and realized it was coming from the ground near his outdoor power outlet, the one near the garden hose. That outlet wasn't often used, maybe once or twice a year when he pressure washed the siding. So why was it lit up? He crouched down, careful not to rustle the bushes nearby. That's when he noticed the cable, a long black extension cord, expertly tucked behind some shrubs, snaked across his yard and disappeared under the wooden fence, right into Karen's property. He didn't touch it. Not yet. Instead, he stood in silence, heart thudding softly, in his chest, processing what he was seeing. There it was, a direct, physical line connecting his electricity to her side of the fence. He followed the cord visually, noting how it blended with the landscaping, almost like it had been designed to go unnoticed. Daniel straightened up slowly, suppressing the urge to storm over and confront her on the spot. Every part of him, the electrician, the homeowner, the man who just wanted to be left alone, was seething. But he took a breath and reminded himself of something far more powerful than rage. Proof. If Karen was siphoning electricity, she'd be caught. But she was. Sneaky. And Daniel suspected this wasn't her first rodeo. No. He had to be smarter. The next morning, Daniel bought a small outdoor security camera. Nothing fancy, just enough to capture motion and activity near the outlet. He installed it beneath the gutter, where the camera's tiny eye could clearly see the plug, the cord, and anything or anyone coming near it. Then he waited. The days passed slowly, but his eyes were sharper now. He noticed more oddities, how Karen avoided eye contact when she saw him, how her dog no longer barked near the property line, and how the ATV now ran with surprising consistency, even on days when the weather was miserable. She was drawing power. He was almost sure of it. And soon he'd have more than just suspicion. He'd have the truth. And when he did, well, Karen had no idea just who she'd been stealing from. The security camera did its job better than Daniel expected. It was a basic motion-activated model he picked up on sale, but it had a clear lens and solid night vision. Every evening he would check the footage over a cup of black coffee, half expecting to see a raccoon or maybe the wind rustling through the bushes. But on the third night, the silence broke. There she was, clear as day, or rather as night, Karen, sneaking around the side of his house with a flashlight in one hand and a bundle of cable in the other. The footage showed her kneeling down, checking the plug, and giving it a little pat like it was a loyal pet. Then, without hesitation, she slipped back through a narrow gate that connected their yards, not even glancing around to see if anyone was watching. Daniel hit pause. His jaw clenched as he watched the timestamp blink on the corner of the screen. 2:16 a.m. 2 in the morning, and she was creeping around his property like a burglar. Not just trespassing, but stealing. Stealing electricity from the same man she had previously lectured about keeping his trash bins aligned with HOA standards. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the frozen image of Karen mid-squat, caught in the act. His pulse was steady, but the heat in his chest was unmistakable. It wasn't just anger. It was betrayal. The woman who paraded herself as the guardian of neighborhood values had been siphoning his power in the dead of night. To charge her ridiculous ATV, no less. He felt violated, like someone had broken into his home, even though it was just a cord. To someone like Daniel, whose life revolved around systems and control, it wasn't a small thing. It was his power, his outlet, and his property. But, instead of storming next door, Daniel closed the laptop gently. Rage was easy, but satisfying revenge? That took patience. The next morning, he went into full investigation mode. Years of working with circuits and wiring had made him methodical. He grabbed his handheld watt meter, a tool that measured power consumption in real time, and hooked it up to the outdoor outlet. Nothing. Flatline. But later that evening, as predicted, the readings spiked. Suddenly, the outlet was pulling energy. Far. More than a garden light or water pump would ever need. He recorded the data, saved the video clips, and began logging the usage patterns. Night after night, it was the same story. Karen was plugging in, draining power, and vanishing like a thief in the night. One day he watched her ATV roar to life and zip down the road for over 30 minutes. No way it could run that long on just a basic charge. Daniel had checked the model online. An average charge cycle was about 3 hours. The math didn't lie. She was hooked into his power daily. Easily $100 or more a month at this rate. He found himself pacing his living room, fists tightening, unconsciously at his sides. What kind of person did that? Especially to a neighbor who had never once raised a fuss, never complained when her dog barked non-stop, never reported her for those odd burn piles in her backyard. But anger didn't make you win. Proof did. So he gathered it all: video clips, meter readings, timestamps, even side-by-side comparisons of his energy bills. His folder was thick with evidence, neatly organized, just like the old days when he had to document faulty wiring on a commercial job site. And still, he waited, because Karen had made a mistake. Not just in stealing from the wrong person, but in underestimating him entirely. He wasn't just the quiet guy next door with a toolbox. He was a man who knew how to lay traps, and she had already walked right into one. Daniel didn't approach Karen right away. He waited for the right moment, one when she was outside and couldn't retreat behind a locked door. It came on a sunny Saturday morning. Karen was out front, pruning her already spotless hedges while her little rat dog yapped at leaves like they were intruders. She wore her usual athletic gear, bright leggings, oversized sunglasses, and that smug expression like she owned the entire block. Daniel walked over slowly, hands in his pockets, calm as a breeze. He wasn't there to shout or accuse. No, he wanted her off guard. "Morning, Karen," he said politely. She turned, flicking her sunglasses down her nose. "Oh, Daniel, something wrong?" "Actually, yeah," he said, voice steady. "I've been noticing a strange spike in my electricity bill. The last couple months. Thought it was my HVAC system at first, but turns out someone's been tapping into my outdoor outlet." Karen's brow lifted slightly. "Oh?" she said with faux concern. "That sounds serious. Maybe you should call the utility company." He gave a slow nod. "Yeah, I considered that, but Then I found an extension cord, running from my outlet over the fence, directly into your garage. A flicker of something passed behind her eyes, but it vanished quickly. That's ridiculous. I have video footage, Daniel said evenly. From my security camera, shows you plugging it in at night. Her face hardened. I don't know what you think you saw, she snapped, arms crossing defensively, but I've never touched anything on your property. If there's a cord, maybe someone else put it there. Karen, he said, eyes narrowing just slightly. You're on video, flashlight and all. It's you. That's when she shifted. Tactics. Her voice grew louder, more indignant. Are you spying on me now? She snapped. Recording me without my permission? That's harassment. I knew something was off with you. Daniel didn't flinch. He'd expected the deflection, the drama. Karen was a professional manipulator, and now she was performing. For the whole street. You're on my property, he said coolly. My camera points at my outlet. That's perfectly legal, Karen scoffed. You know what? I'm done with this conversation. I feel threatened. I don't feel safe talking. To you. And with that, she stormed up her driveway, dog bouncing behind her, and disappeared into the house. Daniel stood there for a moment, letting her theatrics hang in the air like bad perfume. 20 minutes later, the HOA president, a balding man named Todd, with a permanent coffee stain on his shirt, showed up at Daniel's door. Hey, Karen. Called? Todd began awkwardly, holding a clipboard like a shield. Said there's been some sort of conflict? Daniel raised an eyebrow. She mean the part where she stole electricity from me, or where she tried to flip it and accuse me of harassment? Todd blinked. She didn't mention the electricity. Of course not. Daniel led him to the garage and pulled up the video footage. He let it play without commentary. Karen creeping through the bushes, plugging into the outlet and retreating, like some suburban ninja. Todd watched in silence, eyes wide. Oh, he said. Daniel followed up with the power meter logs, the cord still draped behind the bushes, and even offered to let Todd inspect it himself. Todd declined, mumbling something about probably needing to take this to the board. It didn't end there. The next day, Karen called the actual police. 2 officers showed up at Daniel's home. They were polite, but clearly annoyed when they realized what they'd been sent out for. After watching the same video and walking the property line, one of them asked flatly, "You want to press charges, sir?" Daniel shook his head. "Not yet." "No," he said, "but I'm documenting everything." Karen stood on her porch watching, arms crossed, lips tight, like she was still the victim in all this. But now the power was shifting, and Daniel wasn't done. He wasn't just going to catch her. He was going to make sure she never forgot who she messed with. Daniel wasn't the kind of man who acted out of impulse. Years of electrical work had taught him that one wrong move, one crossed wire, could fry more than just a circuit. It could end lives. So when Karen tried to flip the script and paint him as the villain, he didn't lash out. He took a deep breath, went back inside, and sat at his desk like a man preparing for war. She wanted drama. He would give her precision. The idea struck him late that night as he stared at the blinking cursor on his computer screen. He'd been digging through his old manuals, tech forums, and a few industry-grade PDFs he'd saved over the years. Then it clicked. A decoy outlet. A beautiful, harmless fake. By morning, he was already sketching the layout. His real outlet, the one Karen had been using, would be rerouted and disconnected from the grid. In its place, he'd install a dummy setup that looked functional, but was wired to a standalone power monitor and a battery-powered indicator light. No electricity would flow, but any attempt to draw power would be recorded and visible. The hardware came together quickly. He already had most of the tools: a modified outlet box, low-voltage wiring, a motion sensor, and an old voltage logger from a solar job he did years ago. By midweek, the trap was ready. The dummy outlet was indistinguishable from the real one. To someone like Karen, it would look like she was back in business. Free juice, no questions asked. Except this time, Daniel would be waiting. As he knelt in the grass finishing the installation, he couldn't help but smirk. "Let's see how much you enjoy playing engineer, Karen," he muttered under his breath. The beauty of it all was that it was completely legal. No booby traps, no dangerous modifications. Just a clever bit of electrical theater that would record every attempt she made to steal again. And, in case she caught on too quickly, he added a final flourish. A silent motion detector aimed directly at the outlet, connected to a camera trigger and a notification system on his phone. If she so much as touched the plug, he'd know. The waiting began. A few nights passed without activity. Karen had gone quiet, probably assuming Daniel had let the whole thing go, or maybe too wrapped up in her own delusions of innocence to realize she was still being watched. But Daniel knew her type: entitled, stubborn, and always too proud to admit defeat. She'd be back. Sure enough, on the fifth night his phone buzzed at 2:08 a.m. Motion detected. Backyard sensor. He rolled out of bed silently, heart hammering, not from fear, but anticipation. He opened the app, and there she was, caught once again on camera, crouched in the moonlight like a raccoon in yoga pants. Same flashlight, same cord, same shameless routine. But this time, when she plugged in, nothing happened. She jiggled the cord, checked the outlet, smacked it with her palm. Still nothing. Daniel watched, amused, as frustration spread across her face. She stomped back toward her side of the fence, dragging the cable behind her like a tail between her legs. She had no idea her every move had just been logged and saved. The next morning, Daniel reviewed the footage, time-stamped and crisp, with every piece of data his dummy system had collected. 0 watts drawn, 1 recorded attempt, and a crystal-clear image of Karen, mid-plug, caught in the act again. Only this time, with full intent and repeat behavior. Now, he had everything. Daniel stared at the screen, letting the satisfaction sink in. He hadn't just set a trap, he'd built a case. And now that she'd fallen for it, it was time for the next step. Karen thought she'd been clever. She thought she'd outplayed the quiet neighbor with the toolbox. But what she didn't realize was that Daniel had just flipped the switch, and the lights were about to come on. Karen couldn't resist temptation. Like clockwork, she was back at it the following week. Daniel had left the decoy outlet untouched since her last late-night visit, letting her confidence rebuild. It was a waiting game now, one he knew she'd lose. The spring weather had warmed, and her obnoxiously loud ATV had made a full return to the neighborhood soundscape. Daniel could hear it each evening, roaring to life like a miniature jet engine. Clearly, she'd found a new way to siphon what she thought was his power. What she didn't realize was that the outlet was no longer giving, it was recording. And Daniel had added one final tweak. A cheap inverter with a faulty ground loop, totally harmless but unstable when overloaded. Connected to nothing more than a portable battery system inside a fake junction box. It wouldn't hurt anyone, but it would throw off a few sparks if pushed too hard. And Karen was the kind of person who always overdid everything. It was a Friday afternoon when it finally happened. Daniel was in his kitchen, sipping tea when he heard the sound. Pop, crack, whump. It wasn't a full explosion, but it was dramatic enough to shake the quiet street. He stepped out onto his porch just in time to see a cloud of smoke rising from Karen's side yard, and the unmistakable orange glow of something burning. Her ATV. The back seat was smoldering, plastic hissing as it melted, smoke curling into the sky like a signal flare of guilt. A small crowd began to form, neighbors peeking out from porches and driveways, phones in hand. Karen was frantically throwing water from a plastic bucket, screaming at her garden hose to work faster. Her dog barked in wild circles, adding chaos to the fire show. Daniel walked slowly to the property line, keeping his expression unreadable. Todd from the HOA came running down the sidewalk, out of breath and confused. "What the hell happened?" Karen whirled on him, soot on her face and pure rage in her eyes. "That man sabotaged me!" she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at Daniel. "He rigged the outlet! He set my ATV on fire!" Daniel blinked slowly. "You mean the outlet on my property? The one you were illegally using?" I wasn't," she stammered, but the words tumbled over themselves. "It sparked. It just caught." Todd looked between them, eyebrows raised. "Karen, are you saying you were plugging into Daniel's outlet again?" She froze. Behind them, sirens wailed in the distance. Someone had clearly called 911. Daniel crossed his arms. "You might want to be careful with your words, Karen. This is the second time I've caught you tampering with my electrical system. I have video, data logs, and now a small fire." One of the neighbors, a retired firefighter named Bill, stepped up, phone in hand. "I got footage, too. She was dragging a cord across the yard not 10 minutes ago. My security cam got the whole thing." Karen's face went pale. The fire was out now, the ATV a melted mess of plastic and scorched wires. But the real damage wasn't the vehicle. It was her reputation. The HOA members stared, stone-faced. Whispers spread like wildfire. Then the police pulled up. Karen tried to talk her way out of it, of course. But as soon as Daniel handed them a flash drive of time-stamped footage and power logs, and Bill offered his own camera feed, the story changed. The officer, a no-nonsense woman with mirrored sunglasses and a clipboard, took one look at Karen and said, "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step over here and answer a few questions." Karen opened her mouth to protest, but nothing came out. The fire hadn't been set by Daniel. It had been her greed, her carelessness, and her own illegal connection that pushed the system too far. A minor overload on an ATV battery wasn't unheard of, but when mixed with a makeshift setup and blind arrogance, it was a recipe for exactly this kind of blowback. Daniel turned and walked back toward his porch, the faintest smile playing on his lips. The trap had been set, and Karen had walked right into it, cord first. By the time the smoke cleared and the fire trucks rolled away, the quiet neighborhood wasn't so quiet anymore. Everyone had seen it. Karen's ATV charred and useless, sitting like a monument to her arrogance. The buzz traveled fast, phones lit up, group chats exploded. Neighbors who rarely spoke suddenly had a lot to say. Karen, of course, did what Karen always did: played the victim. The very next morning she stood on her porch with a bandage on her arm that no one remembered her getting, waving her phone and whispering loudly to anyone who'd listen that Daniel had sabotaged her, that she was targeted, that her ATV was attacked. She even claimed to have inhaled toxic fumes and might press charges for chemical exposure. But what Karen hadn't counted on was that this time, people were done buying her drama. Todd from the HOA returned that afternoon, clipboard in hand, expression stony. With him were 2 other board members and a code enforcement officer from the county. Karen met them in her driveway, arms crossed, voice rising with every sentence. "I've lived here longer than anyone. He's been stalking me. That man has cameras pointed at my house. How is that legal?" Todd didn't flinch. "The cameras are pointed at his own outlet, Karen, and according to these logs," he flipped a page, "you've been illegally drawing power from his home for at least 3 months. That's not true. He's framing me." "He didn't need to frame you," the officer cut in. "We have video from 2 separate sources. One from his camera, one from Mr. Bill's across the street. Both show you plugging into his outdoor power supply. Twice." Karen's mouth opened, then closed. "And according to this incident report," Todd continued, "your ATV was being charged at the time of the fire. That's a violation of both safety code and HOA regulations. Unauthorized use of externals, power, improper storage of motorized equipment, and tampering with residential utilities. She looked cornered, panicked. But it was his fault. He rigged it to explode. That's not how electricity works, the officer replied dryly. Your ATV overloaded because you connected it to a system you weren't authorized to use. Again, you're lucky it didn't explode in your garage. Karen's eyes darted around, scanning the crowd of neighbors watching from behind hedges and across driveways. Not one person spoke in her defense. The woman who once bullied her way into every HOA meeting, who threw complaints like confetti and treated the block like her private kingdom, now stood entirely alone. Daniel, watching from his porch, didn't say a word. He didn't have to. Later that week, the official notice came. The HOA fined Karen for multiple violations: unauthorized use of utilities, property damage, and endangering neighbors with an improperly stored vehicle. The county issued a separate citation for code violations, and though she avoided criminal charges, Daniel declined to press them. She'd racked up a small fortune in fines and had her reputation burned worse than her ATV. The neighborhood changed after that. People who used to keep their distance now waved at Daniel when he walked his dog. Some even stopped to chat, offering quiet nods of approval or muttered, "Good job," under their breath. Karen, meanwhile, vanished indoors. The woman who once loudly reminded everyone of the rules now kept her curtains drawn and her mouth shut. Justice hadn't come through shouting or revenge. It had come through planning, patience, and a trap too clever for Karen to resist. Daniel didn't want to be the hero of the neighborhood. He just wanted peace. But sometimes, to get peace, you have to flip the breaker on both the power and the problem. 3 weeks after the fire, a for sale sign appeared on Karen's front lawn, like a surrender flag fluttering in the breeze. No big announcement, no dramatic farewell, just a quiet, desperate exit from a neighborhood that no longer played along with her games. By then, the gossip had dried up, replaced by something more permanent, a shift in how the neighbors viewed her and how they viewed Daniel. At first, Daniel wasn't sure what to do with all the sudden attention. People waved more. Some stopped by with casseroles or fresh-baked bread, as if he'd defended the whole block from some great evil. Even the HOA, which had previously only spoken to him through notices and parking warnings, sent a handwritten thank you note for his civic-minded vigilance. But it was the court ruling that made everything official. Karen had tried to avoid paying restitution, claimed it was all Daniel's fault, that he'd tampered with the outlet and tricked her into using it. But the footage, the logs, and her own history of complaints told another story. The judge wasn't impressed. Not only was she ordered to cover the cost of the melted ATV and the damage to Daniel's wiring, but she also had to pay for the legal fees he incurred while defending himself against her false harassment complaint. All in all, it wasn't millions, but it was enough. Enough for Daniel to make one last upgrade. A month later, new solar panels lined the roof of his garage, gleaming in the sun like armor plating. He'd worked with a local company, had the panels custom installed with smart storage, batteries, and security integration. His power was now completely off-grid and monitored 24/7. No more outlets to steal from, no more leeches, and no more Karen. The irony didn't escape him. She'd tried to steal electricity, and now he had a setup she couldn't touch. Not even theoretically. Clean energy, all his, paid for by the same woman who once tried to flip the script and ruin him. One Saturday, as he stood in his yard admiring the panels, Todd from the HOA stopped by. "You really went all out," Todd said, nodding toward the roof. "Looks good." "Thanks," Daniel replied, hands on his hips. "Figured it was time." There was a pause. Todd glanced at the empty house next door. No word on who's buying it yet, but whoever it is, they've got big shoes to not fill. Daniel chuckled. Let's hope they don't come with extension cords. They shared a laugh, and for the first time in months, Daniel felt something, like genuine peace. Not just relief that Karen was gone, but satisfaction. The kind that came from fighting back the right way, on his own terms. He hadn't screamed, threatened, or stooped to her level. He'd simply let her trip over her own lies. A few days later, Daniel received a letter in the mail. No return address, just a plain white envelope with his name handwritten on the front. Inside was a single note on lined paper. "Hope your solar panels explode." Daniel laughed out loud. He held the note up to the sunlight streaming through the window and shook his head. "Oh, Karen," he said to no one in particular. "You still don't understand how power works." Then he folded the note, slid it into his shredder, and walked outside, where his lights burned bright. His battery bank hummed quietly, and the sun poured energy across his roof like karma in photon form. She stole his electricity, so he rewired the whole situation, permanently. If you enjoyed this video and want to see the next part, let me know in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to stay updated. See you in the next one. Your support means the world.